All right, I think this thing's on. Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Mitch Harper with KSLSports.com, giving you some takeaways from the Tom Holmoe Media Roundtable session. Not many news items per se. Some would argue, maybe newsworthy, newsy items, you could say, as some people would call it in the media. Not much of that. Maybe there'll be some stuff that you could put on KSL5 TV's Twitter page. We'll discuss that maybe later. But there were some good tidbits of info, though, from Tom Holmoe today at the roundtable. And it's a semi-annual roundtable. Now, trying to figure out a little bit on the semi-annual part just a bit. Because usually, you think a general conference, there's 2 times a year. But usually we always see this in January. This is the first time this has happened since January 2020 that Tom Holmoe did this. But nonetheless, it was a good event to hear from Tom and get his perspective on the Big 12 Conference, because since September, we haven't really heard much from him in regards to the Big 12 and how things are going. One of the things that did stand out, and real quick for all you listening on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, share your comments. I can see the feedback rolling through. I'm here at the Student Athlete Building right now, so I can see your comments, and I'll interact with you guys throughout this show. You can get this also on the podcast, so if you're listening on the audio format, appreciate that as well on Cougar Tracks. One of the noteworthy things, though, from that was scheduling. Non-conference scheduling was a hot topic with Tom Holmoe, and one of the things that he did say was that no games that will be in our for non-conference scheduling, they're already on the docket. It's a matter of subtracting the games. So that Nevada game that was announced a couple weeks ago from a Reno outlet, that was already on the books. And remember back in 2008, BYU had Nevada on the schedule, and Nevada canceled the game on them. And there was supposed to be a promised return Provo visit that could have been there in the works. So this was a game with Nevada that was on the books for a long time. So all games that BYU plays on the non-conference slate, they're already on the docket. It's a matter of subtracting what games they have from their independent schedule. So they're not going to be adding any games really for a long time, because you could go as far out as the 2030s before BYU really needs to add inventory for their non-conference scheduling. And it's still not decided yet whether it's going to be 9 conference games or 8 conference games, but Holmoe did discuss that in regards to non-conference scheduling. The topic of Utah and Utah State was discussed, and those 2 teams will be valued in regards to scheduling. The rivalry with Boise State, that's going to go to the back burner. Holmoe didn't say Boise specifically, but he said out-of-state rivals. And you pair that with Jeremiah Dickey, the AD at Boise State, his tweet recently this week. You can piece 2 and 2 together on that front. Some other areas that kind of stood out, the takeaways from this, Holmoe opened up the roundtable talking about how BYU fans were celebrating that the move to the Big 12 Conference was happening. He looked at it from a standpoint of, oh no, we have so much to do. And I think that's a good way to put it, because, I think that everyone's, for BYU fandom and BYU alums and BYU boosters and supporters, they're excited that BYU athletics is going to the Big 12, but there's a lot of work that BYU has to do. And Tom didn't give all the specifics as to what that work looks like, but I think that one of the big things for BYU that they have to do is they got to improve in recruiting, and getting Latter-day Saint athletes is going to be a huge priority. Tom was asked a question about LDS athletes, if there's going to be, ramped up effort, more pressure now that you're in the Big 12 to get LDS athletes. And, Tom acknowledged that there probably will be more pressure, because he did note that BYU missed out on some athletes due to lack of conference affiliation, which is no surprise. I mean, I think everyone knew that with BYU, but the fact that he just publicly admitted that was the first time anyone said that, because I thought back to when Ty Detmer and Kalani, when they first took over, and they said, no one's turning us down because of conference affiliation. Some did, and it was very evident. Now I think BYU's in a better spot to get LDS athletes at a higher clip, the high-end LDS athletes. So being in the Big 12 will definitely help that cause for BYU. Holmoe mentioned facilities as something that possibly needs upgrades. He didn't say anything in the short term. I asked him about that, and he kind of looked at me and said, we can't build a building between now and 2023. And that wasn't necessarily my point, but he said that there was a master plan for like 5 to 10 years out in regards to upgrading facilities. So something to keep a note there. And I think that's needed because you look at some of the facilities like Baylor announced a massive nutrition and football complex. Like that's what BYU needs. I think they need in my personal opinion, they need a facility dedicated completely to BYU football, just BYU football only. I think that's something that needs to be happening in the Big 12 Conference. Let's see here. And again, you can share your comments, your questions that you have. You can follow me on Twitter at Mitch_Harper, at KSL Sports. Share your questions that you have. I can see those rolling through here. The Big 12 meetings that happened in Las Vegas. Holmoe said there wasn't much to those. It's more kind of like a welcoming thing. The 4 new members were there, but there wasn't much, as he put it, cataclysmic news in regards to that. I asked him about the 8 or 9 conference games, what he prefers. He said he prefers Kalani because he's the football coach in that regard to answer that. But, I think that, the trends are going towards a 9 conference game schedule. What that's going to look like, it'll be interesting to see how that ends up playing out there. I think, honestly, the Big 12 should go to 8 conference games, 4 non-conference, and then don't have divisions. I think that's got to be the move. I think that to go to divisions, to go to 9 conference games, I think that hurts their chances. I think the only incentive to going to a 9 conference game schedule would be it increases your conference inventory, which Holmoe noted as far as TV revenue goes, but also it might be challenging to get non-conference games against P5s. And because you look at the alliance, Pac-12, Big 10, ACC, will the Big 12, and maybe to a lesser extent, the SEC, will they be able to get non-conference games against programs in those leagues? It's going to be something to kind of keep an eye on. So that could play a role in potential 9 conference games. I asked Holmoe about the divisions. He didn't have a preference on that. He said a lot of that would just be forecasting or foreshadowing if he gave any take on that. Personally, again, I think they need to go to an East-West model. I think that would be the best route to go. And I don't think you have to completely worry about geography per se. But I think the biggest thing in the Big 12 Conference is that everyone in the league needs to have a Texas presence. I think also you need to make Texas the hub of all things Big 12. I don't think it's a bad thing to potentially have 2 Big 12 teams, maybe in the Big 12 championship game, have that state engaged in all things Big 12, because the SEC is taking on a bigger presence more than ever in the Southeast. Don't let the entire state of Texas become an SEC territory. You got to still have the Lone Star State matter to the Big 12 Conference. I think that's something to keep an eye on as well. Let's see. I asked him about the relationship with Bob Bowlesby. He said it's really good. He said that he's known him since his days at Stanford. It's been a smooth transition to chat with him in the league. So nothing really groundbreaking there. Holmoe said he supports conference playoff expansion, likes the idea of expanding, which I think everyone does. I mean, who honestly doesn't like a 12-team college football playoff? Honestly, and I think the Big 12 Conference has got to be advocating for this a ton. Bob Bowlesby definitely has. He's one on the record. And I think it helps, too. One of the underrated aspects to this is that the Big 12 is in lockstep with the SEC. If you want to have an ally, the best ally to have is the SEC. Let's see here. Just looking over my notes here as to other things that he discussed. Hospitality is kind of the focus in regards to LaVell Edwards Stadium upgrades. He said that he would never have the corners filled up. Well, he's the athletic director, said that those would be the least, wanted seats. No one would want to buy those. Those would be the last tickets sold. He said that the supply to demand is at a pretty good clip right now for where BYU is heading into the Big 12 Conference. So hospitality is kind of the focus in regards to upgrades there. He also talked about 2023 is the right time for them to join the Big 12 Conference. There was some thought maybe that the Olympic sports go in 2022. That's not going to happen. BYU is going to go in 2023. And I think one of the biggest things, too, as I talked with back in October, I talked with Keith Warkink on an interview on KSL News Radio, and he said that, it's just scheduling. Like BYU's no Sunday play is a big scheduling act. Like you got to juggle a lot of things. And I think, Holmoe, I asked him if specifically the partnership with the WCC was the reason why they're staying in until 2023. He didn't say that. I think it comes down to scheduling. BYU's no Sunday policy makes scheduling a lot trickier because in power conferences, they're scheduling out maybe upwards of 2 years in advance, sometimes even farther. The Big Ten Conference will schedule out league schedules 3-4 years in advance. These leagues want everything planned in advance, and to just kind of do things on the fly, it's not customary. I know that 2020 altered our views of how schedules can come together, but these leagues, these entities, they want things planned far in advance. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons BYU is going in 2023 instead of 2022. Talked about Kalani, brought up his conversations with Oregon and the contract negotiations. He said that the contract for Kalani was discussed well before the Big 12 move. Now, they had that extension, if you remember, before the Big 12 announcement. It was like a 2-year extension to 2025. This added another 2 years on it. So Holmoe mentioned that, but felt like his conversations with Kalani were always a good place every single day they were talking. Let's see here. But yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest key notes. I mean, not many big ticket items from these, but I think that the thing is that there's a lot of excitement, I think, for BYU when it comes to the Big 12 conference inclusion, and a lot still got to be sorted out. And I think one of the things too for BYU is that they're going to have to get adjusted to life of not calling their own shots anymore. In the WCC, they're the biggest voice. I mean, Gonzaga is the biggest basketball brand, but BYU is a massive voice. You go down to a WCC tournament, all the imaging, all the signage, all the sounds, the game day atmosphere, it's all like a BYU production. Like it's the same production that you see at the Marriott Center. BYU TV's just opened with welcome arms. Like that's not going to be the case anymore in the Big 12. Like they are just a team. They're one of 12. They are not this big unicorn brand that has this massive building and this massive fan base. It's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. And I think that's going to take some time for BYU to get used to, that they just quite frankly haven't been dealing with for a long period of time. I think people forget, the Mountain West Conference, BYU was sometimes viewed as this difficult entity to deal with. And, that probably at that time they maybe could have been. Who knows what the backdoor dealings were. But I think that in the WCC, they were a good partner. They added a ton of value to the WCC, and the WCC wanted BYU to really add their value onto the league. In the Big 12 wants to kind of do their thing, and BYU just kind of has to kind of fall in line with what the Big 12 wants to do. So for Tom Holmoe to, we're going to ask the questions. We have to, for him to say, this is what I want for the divisions. He can't really say that because BYU's not going to be calling the shots in this league. Like it's not their league. It's Bob Bowlesby and the school presidents and the administrators. Like they're the ones calling the shots. And BYU is just one of 12 voices. So I think that's going to be something that's going to be from a political side of things in the conference that BYU just got to get used to. And that happens with any conference transition for teams maybe outside the power structure moving in to a power league. Maybe another thing too that I thought was interesting, I asked Tom Holmoe about if he's consulting with anyone, like leaning on people that have gone through this similar experience. And he said that he has consultants and BYU alums, BYU fans, BYU boosters that he trusts that have maybe helped with this process and business people. So, but again, full recap of it on kslsports.com. This will be available on podcast form and a whole lot more. So if there's anything else, I don't see any more questions rolling in here. Let me take a look. Let me see. Appreciate all of you tuning in to watch this. Sometimes I feel a little, I get a little bit floored by the viewership because it's just like I'm just one man. I'm talking to you, and I'm not the prettiest face for viewership. I'm usually a radio guy, but I appreciate all of you tuning in here. I'm just looking at my tablet to see if there's any more questions that I might be missing. Let's see here. Sorry. This is live. It's not good viewership here, but hey, it's not. We're not on KSL 5 TV, so we're okay. Let's see. Let's see here. Gosh. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm not missing any of your questions here. Side note, while we're looking at this, while I'm pulling this up, I was looking over my spreadsheets for BYU football. Coming up in 2022, fall camp starts on February 28th. Gotta say, folks, I think this BYU team can be pretty good. I think that, I know a lot of buzz right now about Jackson Dart, what's going to happen with him. Crystal balls on 24/7 Sports are leaning to Ole Miss, and I think that's kind of been the buzz all along. I think with or without Jackson Dart, BYU is going to be a pretty good football team. I think the big question I have is, the depth that they have defensively and the scheme. How will BYU kind of rise, improve defensively? I think that's going to be one of the big questions I have going into spring football for this BYU team because offensively, I think they're going to be explosive. I think Chris Brooks is going to be a huge addition for BYU, but I wouldn't sleep on Jax McChesney and Lopini Katoa Miles Davis. I'd probably go more Chris Brooks, Jax McChesney, Miles Davis is probably your top three. And I think Lopini's kind of that guy that could be that Bellini type where he can, catch passes out of the backfield. But, I think it's a pretty stacked group. And I think the offensive line is going to be much better than last season. I do. I think Kingsley Suamataia being added to the mix is going to be a huge boost. You put him at right tackle with Blake Freeland at the left. Connor Pay is going to be a standout center in the guard spots. I think that you get, Clark Barrington back, maybe the top NFL prospect on this team. BYU is going to be a stacked group. It'll be interesting to see what happens, how long it takes for Isaac Rex to get back. Saw him a couple weeks ago at the basketball game and on a scooter, and you just kind of go, man, does that project to being ready for, August when fall camp starts? But I think the offense will be really good. Dallin Holker comes back I think he should have a bigger year. I thought a little bit of a sophomore slump, you could say, but I think he's going to be improved in his second full year back, coming back from the mission. My screen just went off. I don't know what happened here, the question. So if any of you ask questions, I apologize. You can slide in my DMs or email me, mharper@ksl.com. I don't know what is going on with the questions. I know some of you asked some. I apologize that I didn't get to those, but feel free to DM me or, again, email me, mharper@ksl.com. And I can get to any of your questions if you have. And I'll talk to you next time here on Cougar Tracks and on kslsports.com.